Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmadu wa nasalli ala Rasuli Kareem. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this series, Journey of Fiqh. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His great name that He teaches what is beneficial to us and that what He has taught us is beneficial and give us tawfiq to practice, inshaAllah. We were in the slide covering the points upon which all the Imams agree regarding Tamadhhub or sticking or following to a madhhab. That the Imams agree upon that and they censure any bigotry that might be there because of the school or madhhab. That means that your loyalties are based on the madhhab or school, and your disloyalty or disassociation with people is due to them being a different madhhab. That this is something censured and should be criticized and should be discouraged. Also, we learned that the existence, to accept it is accepted by all the Imams, the existence that the madhhab exist and they should continue to exist. And it is incorrect to disregard them, oppose them, try to get rid of them, or na'udhu billah, to burn the books of the madhabs. And the third point is, if a mujtahid reaches a state level of independent juristic reasoning where they might not follow the view of the imam of the madhab, they might develop an independent view based on a very deep understanding of the sources. This is something that is praised by all the imams, but it is restricted for those who are fit for that, those who are qualified for that. It's not open to the average alim or the imams of our local masjids. It's not. These are people of high level of understanding tafaqquh in fiqh and very deep research, and usually it's a person quite senior. So we're looking at the method. It was mentioned last week in the last session that the method of the early Imams, such as the four, and Shaykh Aamir Bahjat in the Arabic of this course, he said that he offered an example. So because today when he comes to the ruling, and he gave an example of touching a mushaf. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, that no one is to touch it except for the pure ones. So some modern thinkers, some modernists have said this is referring to the malaika. And so in saying that this doesn't mean that if you don't have wudu you can't touch the Quran. So where did they get this from? Where did they get this understanding from? They said, well, we found it in some tafsirs. So alright, you're leaving the established fiqh schools which tells you the do's and don'ts and saying I'm doing ijtihad, but in reality what you're doing is you found some opinion, minority opinion or fringe opinion or rare opinion or unusual opinion, and you've copied that opinion. So you left copying this, which is established and accepted by the ummah, for some rare and unusual opinion. So in reality, you're still following someone else. So this is not ijtihad. This is not independent reasoning. When you're picking and choosing and madhhab hopping and picking according to desires. You have not gathered all the narrations. This is not a deep research or into that opinion. And you have not collected all the tafsir of the Sahaba and Tabi'een, how they learned it from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how those who learned from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's companions, and you're not talking about the analysis of the chains and narrations, and so in reality what you're doing is, if you ask them this, have you done ijtihad like this? Have you studied all the narrators? Have you studied all the narrations? They'll say no. Have you studied this change independently? Or have you analyzed them in the light of people much later than the four Imams, like books like Tahdhib, upon which you make taqleed on the classification narrators? Those who claim that they're making ijtihad, especially in the modern era, they say we're making our own ijtihad, and say, but if you look at their ijtihad, it's not even a drop of the ocean of the ijtihad of the early Imams, because they're still depending on later people, like 6-7 centuries after the Imams. So for example, when it comes to the classification of hadith narrators, like you have a chain. So like let's say Imam Bukhari, Imam Abu Dawood, rahimahullah, they've recorded a hadith. That hadith between them and Rasulullah is a chain. So-and-so narrated from so-and-so, narrated from so-and-so, narrated from such a sahabi. Each of these narrators after Sahaba radhiyallahu anhu is classified, ins and outs of their life are checked, their honesty is checked, their memory is checked, and so forth, in a very detailed way. Now what happens is later Imams, they don't have the access to the information that the early Imams had. And in this example, for example, let's take one hadith on the idea of touching the Quran without, that you can't touch the Quran except in a state of wudu. Now let's say the hadith is 4 or 5 narrators. and you take one of those narrators, how would you, without you're relying and doing taqleed and following and imitating later Imams, but if you're honest about ijtihad and you're honest about going to the sources, then you should analyze each narrator yourself, not rely on other people's opinions regarding that narrator. So you have to be honest regarding the hadith narrators and about ijtihad. And these early, one of these Imams, one of these narrators, as an example, Shaykh Aamir Bahjat gave the example, because let's say you have a narrator who's narrated 16, he's in the chain of narration of 1650 hadiths. Then if you're honest to the idea of ijtihad, and you want to put yourself on the same standard as the early Imams, then you have to understand that 1650 hadiths have to be looked at. That this narrator is on the chain of narration. And who has taken from these 1650 hadiths? We're still talking about one hadith. One narrator in one hadith. There's still other narrators to go through. Then these 1650 narrations are looked at. It's found that 1500 of these very senior Imams, other authorities have accepted it and considered it reliable. Some hadiths the Imams have put a question mark, but some have judged it very seriously, severely, and have rejected and considered the narrator unreliable. The hukm was given by a majority of those Imams that this narrator is reliable. Right? We're still talking about one narrator in one hadith out of a group of many hadiths. Then you move on. How long is it going to take you to study that narrator? If you have to analyze all the hadiths that he's narrated and compare what the Imams have said about him and who has taken, not taken, what are the question marks that are raised and so forth, regarding what are the issues raised regarding this narrator. So if you're saying I'm not going to follow anyone and I'm going to do my own ijtihad, then you have to be honest and you have to be and you can't refer to and you can't depend, because as soon as you say that I'm not going to follow the Imams, then also in hadith and in other sciences and the classification, you also have to follow the same standard and rule. So, and then the person said, well, those few people that have criticized this narrator, as an example, why wouldn't their view be taken as a standard? Well, they said there's a rule that criticizing is preferred than praising. Right, if you're taking that view. But who said that? Some Imams said no, praising is more preferred than criticizing in a chain of narration. Like if you look at critiquing and criticizing a narrator is higher than praising him. And the other Imams have. So now you've chosen this rule, standard. So you had to make a decision at some point. And now your whole structure, you're developing your own structure, but it's based on what other people have said. The principles, the guidelines have already been done. So it's not an honest appraisal. It's not really an ijtihad. It is not an independent ijtihad, because the person that is doing it in the 21st century or 20th century is not actually a mujtahid. They can't do this. This work is so beyond their scope that they don't realize. So, for example, the Imams, when that one narrator is there's some critique of it. It's possible that the narrator is thiqah or reliable or trustworthy, but he can make a mistake. So when Imam Ahmad says about a reliable narrator, says that this person is weak, or this person is he's weak in narration. He's strong, reliable, but here he's made a mistake. So it's possible someone is good and reliable and trustworthy, but can make a mistake. So someone can come along now and someone comes along, a student knowledge comes, and how can you say that when the hadith is narrated sahih? Yes, many of the hadith he says is sahih. But on this narration, Imam Ahmad knows, as an example, he might say, no, in this narration he's erred, he's made a mistake. And that is possible. It's not to take anything away from the person, but it's to say that in a specific narration there is a mistake, it's possible. So you have a look at this narration just as an example. We're looking at one narration on one issue, one narrator within that, and you have 4, 5, 10, 15 narrators depending on the hadith, how many people are between the recorder and the book and and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you need like 1 year, maybe you need 1 year to know one narrator, next year another narrator, next year another narrator. So, and then you have to, you could spend your whole life in one masala. Then the question comes, how did the Imams know? And this is the gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to this ummah, is people with phenomenal memories. that Imam Ahmad, as an example, knew 1 million hadiths. One of the Imams said, I know 100,000 hadiths like people know Qul Allahu Ahad, Surah Ikhlas. Right? So that 1 million hadiths, and he practiced all of them. And there's 1 million hadiths he knows practically. Like a person, like see one thing I know about a certain city or a suburb. Superficially, I know sort of the outline of the city, where the town center is, sort of roughly from a distance, right? Like, we'll know some people might never been to Washington, but know the layout of Washington. Or never been to New York, but I know some streets, probably heard about them, knows about it. But one is a person living there, knows all the alleyways and all the details and who lives where and so forth. More than that, these Imams, they lived in that time. They knew who he was, because they were in reach. They were generation, 2 generations within their immediate vicinity. And they memorized the hadith and they memorized who they were. And then they could meaningfully corroborate in their mind, right? Their minds were phenomenal. Not just they memorized, they were not just computers like to store the detail, but they actually can corroborate and sort the data and query a person in their mind, like check, okay, so-and-so's narrated, and they could recall all of that information. And then form a judgment regarding a narrator, and hence on the narration and the weight of that narration. And they could identify weak points, possibly a mistake they made in memory, possibly a mistake they made in, because there's so many other narrators that were there, and they narrated, like 5 narrators narrated slightly differently, and he narrated it, 1 against 5 and so forth. Just elaborating on that point. They're comparing. So today a student memorizes. So compared to today, it's considered actually quite a good student if he memorizes the 40 Arba'een of Imam Nawawi, memorizes Umdat al-Ahkam, about 500 hadiths of fiqh, memorize Bulugh al-Maram. And that's something that is good. But you don't know all the chains right up to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And even if you know one, to corroborate it all and try to sift through it and try to synthesize and form a view regarding a masala is not as easy. It's not in the same level, and it's not nowhere in the same league as the early mujtahids. Some students study 1 year, one narrator, and each and reaches the conclusion. He's in the first year of his studies and reaches the conclusion that this narrator thiqah is reliable. And like this type of overconfidence is something that should be censured. Now, in this masala of the not touching the Quran, each hadith, each narration, each fatwa of Sahabi, each narration from a Sahabi and Tabi'i, each one has a chain of narration, has to be studied. The actual narration themselves have to be studied. How many decades of work will it take just to learn one mas'ala? Let's say all the authentic narrations for this jihad is gathered, right? Why this mas'ala is being explained? Because some people today say it's this is only referring to the malaika. Some say it's only if you're pure from shirk you can touch the Quran. Some say that you can touch the Quran. This doesn't apply to someone who breaks wudu. In reality, they're not fit for ijtihad. They're not people of ijtihad, and they're taking upon themselves. What is a mujtahid and what is ijtihad? A mujtahid is a faqih, is a jurist who pours all his energies into the understanding of the depths of a shari ruling until nothing is left more to say or research. Like they shine a light into an issue, into every aspect of that issue, and take it as a whole, complete, and understand all the ins and outs and intricacies of that issue. Then form a judgment regarding that. It's not just haphazard or emotions or I'm in the mood to like this or not like that. It's got nothing to do with that. These people apply their great intellect, their genius. Alhamdulillah, Allah created people like that in His ummah, that they applied themselves fully, with full sincerity and with great genius until that issue became clear, and then they recorded it as a fiqhi masala and a decision was made on that. Some modernists freed themselves by self-interpreting the verse and disregarding the narrations. However, this is not how the early Muslims jurists looked at the issue. After the hadith, they looked at the fatwas and sayings of Sahaba and Tabi'een. Many modernist researchers ignore intentionally the hadith. They intentionally ignore the sayings of Sahaba and Tabi'een, the tafsir of Sahaba and Tabi'een regarding this ayat, or they're ignorant of it. They don't know. And subhanAllah, you'll be surprised, Shaykh Aamir talked about certain modern methodologies people have adopted incorrectly. So for example, like calculating averages. So like, you take 10 and 20 and add it and divide it by 2 and you get 15, like the average, right? That's how averages work. So they apply this type of attitude towards fiqh. Like they combine two masalas and make their own middle, like a hybrid masala. Or they take 3 views and they said, oh, well, they look at it ease and difficulty. Well, this is the most difficult, this is the most easiest, this seems like in the middle. These are all incorrect, invalid methodologies. These are not methodologies the fuqaha applied. These are like modern ways of people have invented themselves. Or they find what is good for the public, for the community, or the public, for the public benefit, a maslaha. There's some good in it. And no proofs, no dalils from the Quran or Sunnah. And like for example, the masala of the issue of 3 divorces in one gathering. A person issued 3 divorces. And a person's, when he said, well, 3 is 3, no, 3 is 1. Brother, akhi, the kids, the family, is going to divide. Islam is against division of the family and breaking up the family. And, he will tell such a story that, some ulama do this as well, that, will bring you to tears. Bring you, to tears. And they'll say the maslaha benefit dictates that Islam is for the family. This is not the starting point of a ruling. You don't start from this. A ruling in Sharia is based on proofs. You start with the sources, that is the Quran and Sunnah. You understand the problem, situation, then you go back to the sources. You go to what the ulama and mujtahids explain. In this situation, what is the rule? You understand, make sure the situation is fully understood. You're cognizant of all of the ins and outs. Now you have to go back to the sources. You have to go to the Imams of the sources and analyze. Then you'll have to analyze narrators, Sahaba, fatwas, and so forth. But giving fatwas based on emotions, the person is so much in love. If he doesn't get back to his wife, he's going to jump off a bridge. Or they bought a house together. If they get divorced, they have to split the house, etc., etc., etc. This is how people fatwas are. For some Imams, these things are factors. Some ulama today factor these things into the decision process. But none of these things have a bearing on the ruling. And all this emotional talk, like you have to comfort the person and, as a brother and so forth in Islam. But all this talk does not change, has no bearing on the ruling itself. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't. You can't change the ruling based on people's whims or people's desires. The early Muslim had an insight into the rulings that students of today are not capable of achieving. If a person has reached a level of ijtihad and gives preference, then even if he makes a mistake, is rewarded. So those early Imams, they made ijtihad, they qualified. Even later Imams, if they made ijtihad and they qualified the ahl for that. Not everyone's ijtihad is to be accepted. Those who are fit for ijtihad, if they made ijtihad, that ijtihad, even if they erred, we know that the person is still rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you have to have reached the level of ijtihad. The 4th point on the slide is to accept that adhering to a madhhab is like graduating from a principal school of fiqh, which is supported by dalils or proofs and also seeks the strongest proof. So, firstly, in the madhhab, to associate or affiliate with the madhhab, to say that I am Hanbali, as an example, there's no issue with that. Someone, let's say so, that's not a realistic equivalence, but if someone says, I'm Azhari, I studied in Azhar, or Dar'ami, I studied in Dar Ulum in Egypt, or someone in India says, I'm Qasimi, because the Qasimi is there from Dar Ulum Dioban, or someone says Madhhari, study Mazar Ulum. Different Dar Ulums are there throughout the world, different madrasas are there, different institutes they have. So that's affiliation or association with a particular school by taking that title or name. There's nothing wrong with it. No one can say there's anything wrong with that. And by affiliating with a specific madhhab is understanding deen of dalil. It's tafaqquh and understanding deen with proofs. If somebody studied Mughni, which is a Hanbali fiqh book, right? Is that not a study of the fiqh of dalil, studying the proofs of Islam, Quran and Hadith? Because the whole book that's all it's Quran and Hadith in a fiqh book. And all the madhahib have that. And if you look at our history, then you'll see that after the establishment of the madhabs, pretty much every imam after that affiliated one school or the other. So you'll have, till about 100 years ago really, and even till now to a certain degree. So for example, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he's a Shafi'i. He's known as a Shafi'i Imam. Imam Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah is a Hanbali. Imam Kasani is Hanafi. Imam Qarafi is Maliki, etc. So these are associated. There's nothing. It's not something you've censured. There's no criticism. There's nothing. It doesn't divide the ummah or anything like that, as some people have misunderstood today. The last point on this slide is permissibility of adhering to a madhhab, sticking to the view of the imam of the school that he affiliates with. The satisfaction that the imam's view is based on careful consideration of the proofs of this view. So, on any issue, if a person reaches his ahl, he's fit for ijtihad, and he's able to prefer one view of the other, and it matches with the imam's mazhab, and he attributes to the imam, said this is the view of Imam Ahmad, and he attributes his research to the imam of the madhhab, meaning he leaves out himself and he directs people to the madhhab as the imams did. They didn't call people towards themselves, they called the people towards following the imam in the school. Even their own research, they encourage. There's nothing wrong, and this cannot be censured. If someone can do research and tell people that this is my view, right, and tell people to sort of follow him or to accept his view or his, why can't an imam and alim say that after all my careful consideration, follow the imam of the madhhab? If an alim or a mujtahid or a researcher in the madhhab encourages people and says to them, follow the madhhab of this, because I follow his madhhab, and I've done the research and presents it as such, what is wrong with that when some people criticize that, and they're criticizing it while they themselves are doing the exact same thing about themselves? While this person is probably more sincere in the sense that he doesn't want to put himself in the middle. He gives all the credit to the imam of the madhhab under which he has studied. So in conclusion, there are two, the view of the madhhab, sticking to a madhhab. There are ulama that have the view it is wajib, or it's permissible, merely permissible, or it's forbidden. And the majority of the later usuli scholars, the legal theorists, or legal theory experts, from all the madhabs, all the Ahlul Sunnah Jama'ah schools agree that it is wajib to stick to a madhab. It's compulsory to stick to a madhab. In terms of how you stick to the madhab, there are two views broadly. One is that a person, or how do you actually follow the ulama, or how do you follow fatwas ulama? One view is that there's no difference of opinion. It's permitted to follow fulan, a certain shaykh. I'll stick to him or everything from Imam Shafi'i, for example. Either stick to a madhab or ask an Imam Mufti. Shaykh Adnan Naham from Kuwait, my teacher's teacher, when I met him and asked him this question, he said, for the average person, their Mufti is the local Imam, usually. They just go to the Imam and say, Imam, traditionally this is what people used to do. They go to the masjid where they pray regularly. They don't go to Google, they don't go to YouTube and other things as we do today. What they do is just go to their local Imam and they ask the question and he answers them. That's their madhab. They don't even know what madhab they're probably following in that country or that place or that town or village. And the Imam answers the question and that's it. That's sufficient for them. And the other view is that a person might ask the ulama of different madahib. But the care has to be taken there. Is this done for mufti shopping? Is it done for mazhab hopping? Is it look for just following desires and just to do it for the sake of doing it? Or is it a person genuinely that wants to know the right? So he finds the ulama that fear Allah and that are reliable, trustworthy amongst the ulama and the community. And then the person asks the question. And he could ask a Maliki one day and Hanafi one day and so forth. Some view of the ulama is that this is also okay, as long as that person, because there's a reliable ulama, as long as that person is not following their desires, as long as they're not following, they're looking for concessions and trying to find shortcuts. If that's the intention to go into asking masala, then this is forbidden. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding and tawfiq to practice what we say in here. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.